Hey y'all, it's LD, and today is the 12th of May. I wanted to talk on something really quick, and I'm dating this video because I wanted to express my opinions on something that just came out today from Rolex. They've been hyping or promoting a May 12th announcement. It was released today, and if you look on the interwebs, there's a lot of there's a lot of, sarcasm because most people don't understand what was actually said today by Rolex, and I want to talk about this. They have and it's called beating into the pulse of the universe because they did this kind of Loki, Nexus, whatever you want to call it, black hole marketing for the past couple of weeks since Watches and Wonders. And now today it talks about beating to the pulse of the universe. I'm going to read this word for word and then we'll break it down because I don't think a lot of quote unquote watch YouTube understands the significance of what was released today. And I think it's actually fairly impressive. First thing it's going to talk about is today to measure the second as precisely as possible, the oscillation of a watch's balanced hairspring and the vibration of quartz have given way to ultra high frequency of the atom. Now, this is going to get lost a lot of people because we talk about ultra high frequency, things from the spring drive, things from quartz oscillation, the 262 kilohertz for the precisionist movement. The higher the frequency, usually the more stability that you have of a reference signal. So, in its continuous quest for precision and integration, Rolex has developed an optical atomic clock unlike any other in the world. Now, that is, when I say that, that is marketing. That is, I'm not going to say call it fluff, but that is marketing speech. To achieve this, the brand joins forces with the Swiss Center of Electronics and Microtechnology, CSEM, located in Neuchâtel. This is now getting into where we are talking about substance. It goes in even further. The result of several years of research, the clock's technology relies on the use of rubidium, a metallic element that can produce frequencies 100,000 times higher than current atomic clocks. I'm going to say this because most atomic clocks, I think, use cesium. I want to see cesium 23. I could be off on that, or 123. But cesium atom, for those who don't know, how a second is actually defined is not the passage of time, but it's the time that it, or the frequency element of how it takes light to travel through an atom and a space over a certain distance. That gives you what a second is, what a time is. So it's taking a known reference, i.e. light, and using that over distance to give you speed, which gives you second. And it's, to kind of break it down, it's kind of like when we talk about what equals a volt, resistance, and current. It is Ohm's law. They're using a frequency or variation, a formula and probably Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson could explain this better than I can, but they're pretty much using a formula and reverse engineering it to get to what a second is. Here's what's important, and this is the next part that it talks about. Once they have been stimulated by a laser at a very precise, very high frequency, 385 tetrahertz, the rubidium atoms emit blue fluorescent light. And this is the thing that is impressive about this. When returning to their ground state. So it's the time that from excitation to rest, that is what they're going to define as a reference for a second. So what Rolex is coming with this announcement is that the standard reference is going to be based for a second is going to be closer to the actual international standard. And this is no longer about when it talks about the drift rate, this is no longer about, oh, how accurate a clock is, whether it loses 1 second a year or 2 seconds a year or whatever. This is about what is actually a second, what defines the second. So effectively, and this is where we go to next, establishing a new standard by which the precision testing machines in the brand's workshops are now set. And what does that mean? When I set my clocks, when I set my watches, I set my watches to the NIST clock, time.gov. I set that to the second. And then I can measure over time how much my watch or how much my clock has drifted. I have a Citizen Eco Drive Tsukuyomi AT atomic clock that gets a timing signal every night to pretty much recalibrate itself to that signal, to that taking an unknown value to a known reference, right? That's what we call calibration. And so what Rolex is saying now is that in-house, they have a way, a clock, a reference standard in-house that is has a tighter tolerance than what most atomic clocks have around the world, which can be anywhere from 1 second per every 30 years to 1 second every 300 years. They're talking about drift to billions of years, I think what it is, yeah, or per million years. Now, this is where it talks about that it outperforms other clocks. I think that's marketing myself, but this is where we go back to the technology. Its operational stability is unequaled for a clock of this type, marketing, but it has a drift that is less than 1.1 billionth of a second per day, which is equivalent to less than 1 second per million years. That's the drift rate. So it doesn't say, it just says that if I take a reference standard, and this is used in metrology labs all around the world. This is used in metrology labs off planet, like in space. So an industrial standard, and correct me, I'm thinking off the top of my head as I'm saying this. So if you have anything to add to the conversation, I would love to hear it. But in an industrial calibrated version, the clock provides the most accurate second, doing so continuously with the greatest of regularity. And that is the point right there. It's saying this. If we define a second from being here to here, this clock keeps that second not only defined in that space, but over a million years, it would have almost no drift of what that second looks like. It always hit that same spot over and over again. It's like if you're looking at, if you're using firearms or an arrow and you're trying to hit that target, it is hitting that target over and over and over again. This is very important, and I stress this so much because Rolex doing what it does best, defining the narrative. I heard somebody say the other day that Rolex is not a watch company. Rolex is a marketing company because they're so great at marketing. And I will say this, defining the narrative. You have to have a good product to market to begin with, right? But here is where it becomes Rolex saying, not only do we have the crown, we are now going to define what a crown is. The first unit of the Rolex Rubidian atomic optical clock has been installed at the brand site in Geneva and is already contributing to the realization of coordinated universal time. Coordinated universal time takes a whole bunch of atomic clocks and put it to one known reference, which is a first for an atomic or an optical atomic clock. Two other units, one made available to the Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology. So now Rolex is sending another unit to what we know as Metas in Wabern, and the other located at the Rolex site in Bienne. So there's 3 units will also be joining the more than 450 atomic clocks around the world that are collectively used to produce UTC. This is big. What they're saying is this. You can have COSC certification. You can have Metas certification. You can even have Superlative Chronometer certification from 2 years ago. What they're saying is that this clock now is going to be the reference for all of those certifications. So while we have a new way of measuring, Omega came up with this amazing way of measuring chronometer certification acoustically without having to use a second hand or visually see it. Well, Rolex has now said that is amazing, but we're going to come up with a way to define what you're measuring. And that is next level. This is what not only for the next 100 years, but maybe even the next 1,000 years. So while the internet, while this is not sexy, while this is not a new watch, a new brand, a new dial, a new face, this is absolutely 100%, in my opinion, impressive. Not just as a business move, because this gives traceability to international standards. It's fantastic in the way that it was done, because it's done with the on a government side, on a Swiss government side, on a non partial in a way. I mean, Rolex probably funded it, but it's done in a way to where Rolex and the Swiss are trying to make or reestablish the Swiss as being the center of um, watchmaking or time correction. And I had one note on this, and I'm trying to see if I left my notebook outside. One last point I want to make about this: future capabilities. So Omega uses Medos, and we know that that's the big thing. But as a business side, if I am Omega, I am never ever talking about how I use this technology. But the future side is this, and this is kind of one of the things I locked in. If I'm Mosier, if I'm FP Journe, if I'm Vouderainen, if I'm all of these different independents, it creates a framework to where, and they don't care. I shouldn't say they don't care about plus minus 1 second a day. I'm saying that they don't advertise or market or sell based on plus minus 1 second a day. So Rolex has now had the ability now to scale accuracy and an accuracy reference at scale, which is impressive, from OP to day date, whatever it is, right? But you're now at the point to where if I'm an independent watchmaker, there is a business case to where I can now send my watches to Rolex Labs to now have verification at the highest levels of timekeeping. And that is impressive. Let me know what you got to add to the conversation. And as always, like a fat kid in dodgeball, I'm out.